off. The Indiana Fever go into New York and walk out of New York with a W in hand. Things that I like.
It started as the perfect comeback story. The kind of moment that reminds you exactly why Caitlin Clark is one of the most electrifying players in basketball. The arena was loud, the energy inside Barclays Center felt different, and from the very first possession, she looked like she hadn't missed a step. A quick drive to the rim, an effortless finish, and then, boom, a deep three from logo range that sent the crowd into a frenzy. Just like that, 5 points in seconds, and it felt like we were about to witness something special. Fans were already thinking the same thing: she's back, and she's about to take over the league again. But what nobody expected was how quickly that excitement would turn into concern. Because after that explosive start, something shifted. The shots stopped falling. The rhythm disappeared. Possession after possession, the misses started stacking up, and suddenly the conversation wasn't about dominance anymore, it was about what was going wrong. And then came the moment that changed everything. Cameras cut to the sideline, and there she was, sitting calmly, but wearing something that instantly sent fans into panic mode: a visible back brace wrapped tightly around her lower back. Within minutes, social media exploded. People weren't talking about the score anymore. They weren't talking about the win. The only question that mattered was, is Caitlin Clark okay? Now here's where things get even more interesting, because while the internet was spiraling, the Indiana Fever were doing something that most people completely overlooked: they were dominating. Not surviving, not barely winning, dominating. Against a loaded New York Liberty team, in a hostile environment, they dropped over 100 points and controlled the game from start to finish. And the scary part? They did it without needing Clark to go off. That's where this story flips completely, because what we might be witnessing isn't just a superstar returning, it's the rise of a team that no longer depends on just one player. Players like Kelsey Mitchell stepped up and took control when the offense needed stability, scoring efficiently and confidently like a true veteran leader. At the same time, rookie Raven Johnson quietly delivered one of the most impressive debuts you'll see, controlling the pace, making elite decisions, and proving she can run the offense at a high level. That combination alone changes everything for this team. Because now, defenses can't just focus on Clark anymore. If they trap her, someone else will make them pay. If they don't, she'll still find ways to impact the game. That's how dangerous teams are built, not around one star, but around a system that works no matter who's scoring. But let's be real for a second, none of that matters if Clark isn't healthy. That's the truth nobody wants to ignore. Because we've seen this before. We've seen injuries slow momentum, change seasons, and completely shift expectations. And that's why that back brace moment hit so hard. It wasn't just about what we saw, it was about what it could mean. The fear of history repeating itself. The fear that just when everything was starting to come together, something might be wrong again. At the same time, there's another side to this that deserves attention. There's been no official report confirming an injury. No clear sign during the game that she was struggling physically. No limp, no hesitation, no obvious discomfort while playing. Which raises a different possibility: what if this isn't serious at all? What if it's just precaution, recovery, or standard support after a long break from competitive play? Because in professional sports, especially early in the season, teams are extremely careful with their stars. And if that's the case, then all of this panic might be premature. So now everything comes down to what happens next. Not the highlights. Not the stats. Not even the win. The real story moving forward is simple: what condition is Caitlin Clark actually in? Because if she's fine, if this is just a minor precaution, then what we saw in this game should terrify the rest of the league. A team that can score, defend, move the ball, and win convincingly even when their biggest star isn't at her best, that's not just a good team. That's a problem. And the craziest part? This might just be the beginning. What made this game so confusing for a lot of people is that on the surface, it looked like a bad night for Caitlin Clark. You check the stats, you see the missed shots, and the immediate reaction is simple: she struggled. But that's the kind of shallow takeaway that misses the entire story. Because what actually happened on that court was far more complex, and honestly, far more encouraging than most people realize. This wasn't a player falling apart, this was a player adjusting in real time after months away from elite competition, testing her rhythm, her timing, and her body against one of the toughest defensive teams in the league. Think about it, this wasn't just another game. This was her first real WNBA action in months, stepping into a fast, physical, high-pressure environment against the New York Liberty, a team built to win right now. The defensive schemes were aggressive, the physicality was real, and every possession was a test. And yet, even while the shots weren't falling, Clark was still doing something that doesn't always show up on the stat sheet: she was bending the entire defense. Every time she touched the ball, defenders collapsed. Every time she moved off ball, attention followed. That kind of gravity doesn't disappear just because a few shots rim out. It's constant. It's disruptive. And it's exactly why her presence alone still created opportunities for everyone else on the floor. You could see it in how the offense functioned. Even during her cold stretch, the Indiana Fever weren't stuck. They weren't panicking. They were still generating good looks, still moving the ball, still attacking in transition. That's not accidental, that's the impact of a system starting to come together. And a huge part of that was the emergence of Raven Johnson, who didn't just fill in the gaps, she amplified the entire structure of the offense. Her ability to read the floor, push the pace, and deliver clean, smart passes gave the Fever something they didn't consistently have before: a second brain running the game alongside Clark. And that changes everything. Because for months, the blueprint to stop Indiana was obvious: trap Clark, pressure her early, and force someone else to beat you. But now, that strategy starts to fall apart. Because if you commit too much attention to Clark, Johnson is there to pick you apart with precision. If you ease up, Clark gets space, and we already know what happens then. That dual playmaker setup isn't just effective, it's dangerous. It forces defenses into impossible decisions, and over time, that's the kind of pressure that breaks even elite teams. At the same time, players like Kelsey Mitchell continued to prove why this team is deeper than people expected. She didn't just score, she stabilized the game. When things slowed down, when Clark was finding her rhythm again, Mitchell became the reliable option, the steady presence that kept the offense flowing. That balance is critical, especially early in the season, because it prevents the team from becoming one-dimensional. It means they can win in different ways, depending on what the game demands. So when people say Clark had a bad game, they are only looking at one piece of the puzzle. The reality is, this was a transition game. A rhythm game. A game where the shots didn't fall, but the impact was still there in ways that matter just as much, if not more, over the long run. Because the ability to influence a game without scoring efficiently, that's what separates good players from truly elite ones. And yet, even with all of that context, all of that nuance, all of that positive momentum, none of it quieted the one question that kept getting louder. Because no matter how well the team played, no matter how promising the system looked, fans couldn't stop thinking about that one image on the bench. The brace. And this is where everything gets real, because no matter how much you break down the game, no matter how much you talk about systems, depth, or strategy, one image can override all of it. That moment on the bench didn't just raise eyebrows, it triggered something deeper in fans who have been following Caitlin Clark closely. Because they've seen this story before. They've seen how quickly momentum can turn into uncertainty, how one small physical concern can grow into something much bigger. And when you see a player of her caliber sitting there with a visible back brace wrapped around her body, it doesn't feel like a minor detail, it feels like a warning sign. The reaction wasn't random. It wasn't overblown. It was emotional, and honestly, it was justified. Because Clark isn't just another player, she's the centerpiece of the Indiana Fever. Everything this team wants to become, everything fans are hoping for this season, it all connects back to her. So when there's even a hint that something might be off physically, the conversation immediately shifts from basketball to health. From excitement to concern. From highlights to what if. But here's where things get complicated, and where most of the online panic starts to fall apart. Because despite everything people think they saw, there is still no confirmed injury. No official statement. No report suggesting a setback. And maybe most importantly, nothing in her actual on-court movement suggested she was dealing with something serious. She was still attacking the rim, still creating separation, still playing with confidence. There was no visible hesitation, no moment where she pulled back or avoided contact. And for a player dealing with a real back issue, those are usually the first signs you notice. So now we are stuck in this strange space between perception and reality. On one side, you have the visual, the brace, the image, the moment that instantly triggered concern. On the other side, you have the performance, fluid movement, aggressive play, and no clear physical limitation. And until we get real medical confirmation, both of those things exist at the same time. That's why this situation feels so tense, because nobody has a definitive answer yet. It's all interpretation, and in today's world, interpretation spreads faster than facts. What's also important to understand is how teams handle players in situations like this, especially early in the season. The WNBA schedule is demanding, the physical toll is real, and when you have a franchise player like Clark, you don't take risks. You manage everything carefully. That can mean extra support on the bench, preventative measures, or simply being overly cautious after long stretches without game-level intensity. And sometimes, what looks serious from the outside is actually just part of a controlled recovery process happening behind the scenes. But fans don't see the full picture. They see what's in front of them. And what they saw was enough to spark concern across the entire basketball community. Because whether it's serious or not, that moment reminded everyone of one simple truth: this team's ceiling depends heavily on Clark being healthy. Not just available, but fully healthy. Because the difference between a good season and a great one, between a playoff run and a championship push, often comes down to the condition of your best player. And that's why the next few days matter more than anything we just watched on the court. Not the score. Not the stats. Not even the win. The real story is what happens next, what updates come out, how she looks in practice, whether that brace shows up again. That's what will determine how fans feel moving forward. That's what will shape the narrative around this team. Because if everything checks out, if this turns out to be nothing serious, then what we just witnessed becomes something completely different. It becomes a warning. A warning to the rest of the league that even when Caitlin Clark isn't at her best, even when the spotlight is on her struggles, the Indiana Fever can still dominate. And that might be the scariest part of this entire story. If you zoom out for a second and really look at what happened in this game, the story becomes a lot bigger than just one player, one stat line, or even that back brace moment. Because what the Indiana Fever showed isn't just potential, it's structure. It's identity. It's a system that's starting to function in a way that doesn't collapse when things get uncomfortable. And that's the exact point where a promising team starts turning into something much more serious. Think about how rare that is. Most teams, especially ones built around a superstar like Caitlin Clark, tend to fall apart when that star isn't producing at a high level. The offense stalls, the confidence drops, and everything becomes predictable. But that didn't happen here. In fact, it was the opposite. The Fever looked composed. They looked organized. They looked like a team that actually understands how to win games in multiple ways. And that's what should really stand out to anyone paying close attention. A huge part of that comes down to the supporting cast stepping into real roles instead of just playing around a star. Kelsey Mitchell didn't just score, she controlled moments. She picked her spots, stayed efficient, and gave the team exactly what it needed when the game could have slipped. That kind of presence is what stabilizes a team over a long season. It's what prevents cold stretches from turning into losses. And when you combine that with the emergence of Raven Johnson as a legitimate secondary playmaker, you start to see a blueprint forming. Because now, for the first time, this team isn't predictable. It's not just stop Clark and you win. That strategy doesn't hold up anymore. Now you're dealing with multiple decision makers, multiple scoring threats, and a system that moves the ball fast enough to punish any defensive mistake. And that's where things start to get uncomfortable for opposing teams. Because it's one thing to game plan for a star, it's another thing entirely to deal with a system that adapts on the fly. And we haven't even talked about the pace yet. This team wants to run. They want to push every possession, turn defense into offense, and overwhelm opponents before they can even set up. That kind of tempo, when executed correctly, is exhausting to defend. Over time, it breaks teams down, not just physically, but mentally. And when you combine that speed with smart playmaking and spacing, it creates a style of basketball that's incredibly hard to contain over 4 quarters. But here's the key point that ties everything together: none of this works long-term without health. That's the reality. As promising as everything looked, as exciting as the depth appears, it all circles back to one central question: what version of Caitlin Clark are we going to see moving forward? Because if she's healthy and finds her rhythm again, this entire system levels up instantly. The spacing improves. The efficiency jumps. The pressure on defenses doubles. Everything becomes sharper, faster, and more dangerous. And if that happens, then what we saw in this game won't just be a good performance, it'll be a preview. A preview of a team that can compete with anyone, anywhere, under any conditions. A team that doesn't panic when things go wrong. A team that can win even when their biggest star isn't having a perfect night. That's not normal for a young team. That's not typical for a roster still building chemistry. That's something else. That's the foundation of a contender. And now, with the next game coming up, all eyes are going to be locked in, not just to see if they can win again, but to see how this story continues to unfold. Because the pieces are clearly there. The system is starting to click. The confidence is growing. The only thing left to find out is how far this can actually go. Now everything slows down for a moment, and this is where the real pressure begins. Because after a game like that, after the excitement, the concerns, the overreactions, the highlights, what actually matters is what comes next. Not what people think, not what social media is guessing, but what we see in the next 48 hours, and the next time the Indiana Fever step on the floor. This is the part of the story where narratives either calm down, or explode even further. All eyes are going to be locked on one person, Caitlin Clark. Not just to see if she plays, but how she plays. Does she move the same way? Does she attack with the same confidence? Does that brace show up again? Because those small details are going to answer the biggest question that's been hanging over this entire situation. And make no mistake, teams around the league are watching this just as closely as the fans are. Because if Clark is fully healthy, then what we saw in that game becomes something completely different. It becomes a warning sign to every contender that this Fever team is not just hype, they are real. And the timing of this couldn't be more interesting, because the next matchup isn't just another preseason game. It's a measuring stick. A test. A moment where we'll see if everything we just talked about actually holds up under pressure again. This is where chemistry gets tested, where adjustments are made, and where early impressions start turning into real expectations. But beyond the X's and O's, beyond the matchups and the stats, there's something bigger happening here. You can feel it building. The attention around this team is different. The conversations are louder. The reactions are stronger. Every moment is being watched, analyzed, debated. And a huge part of that is because of Clark, not just as a player, but as a presence. She brings eyes to the game. She brings pressure. She brings expectations that most players never have to deal with. And that's why moments like this hit so hard. Because when you're that important to a team, to a league, to a fan base, every little thing gets magnified. A missed shot becomes a storyline. A brace becomes a headline. A preseason game becomes a national conversation. That's the level she's operating on now. But here's the flip side, and it's what makes this situation so fascinating. Even with all that pressure, even with all that attention, even with the uncertainty, this team didn't crack. They didn't fall apart. They didn't lose control. They didn't look overwhelmed. They looked ready. Ready to compete. Ready to adapt. Ready to grow into something much bigger than people expected. So now the question isn't just about Clark anymore. It's about the entire team. It's about whether this group can take this moment, this mix of excitement and concern, and turn it into momentum. Because great teams don't just respond to good situations, they respond to uncertainty. They use it. They build through it. And if the Fever can do that, if Clark is healthy, if the system keeps improving, if the depth continues to show up, then what we are watching right now isn't just the start of a season. It's the start of something that could reshape the entire league. And the next game? That's where we start getting real answers. When you strip everything down, the highlights, the panic, the debates, the overreactions, you're left with something much clearer. This wasn't just about a preseason win. It wasn't just about a shooting night. It wasn't even just about that back brace. What we really witnessed was a turning point, the kind of game that quietly tells you a team is becoming something serious, even if the headlines are focused somewhere else. Because let's be honest, if this was last season, a night like this probably ends very differently for the Indiana Fever. If Caitlin Clark struggled to shoot, the offense likely would have stalled. The pressure would have built. The game might have slipped away. But that didn't happen. Not even close. Instead, they adjusted. They leaned on each other. They found different ways to score, different ways to control the pace, different ways to win. That's growth. That's maturity. And more importantly, that's what real contenders do. And that's why this game matters more than people think. Not because of the final score, but because of how they got there. Because it showed that this team is no longer fragile. It showed that they don't need everything to go perfectly to succeed. And in a league where every team is talented, where every matchup is competitive, that ability to win without perfection is everything. At the same time, you can't ignore the reality that this entire situation still revolves around Clark. That's just the truth. She's the engine. She's the gravity. She's the player that changes how defenses operate before the ball is even in her hands. And if she's healthy, if she finds her rhythm again, everything we saw in this game becomes even more dangerous. The spacing improves. The decision-making becomes sharper. The scoring becomes more efficient. The entire system levels up. But if there's one thing this game proved, it's that the Fever are no longer just waiting for Clark to carry them. They are building something alongside her. Something that supports her, complements her, and keeps the team competitive no matter what kind of night she's having. And that balance, that combination of star power and depth is exactly what separates teams that are exciting from teams that are actually built to win. So now we are at a very interesting point. The excitement is real. The concern is real. The potential is undeniable. And the uncertainty, that's still there too. Because until we get clear answers about her condition, until we see her back on the court again, there's always going to be that question lingering in the background. But maybe that's what makes this moment so important. Because it's not just about proving how good they are when everything is going right. It's about proving who they are when things aren't perfect. And right now, the Indiana Fever look like a team that's ready to take that next step. A team that doesn't break under pressure. A team that adapts. A team that keeps moving forward, no matter what the situation looks like. And if that continues, if the growth we just saw is real, if the chemistry keeps building, if Caitlin Clark is healthy and locked in, then this isn't just a storyline. This is a warning. A warning that the Fever aren't coming slowly anymore. They are coming fast. And the rest of the league might not be ready for what's about to happen next. When you strip everything down, the highlights, the panic, the debates, the overreactions, you're left with something much clearer. This wasn't just about a preseason win. It wasn't just about a shooting night. It wasn't even just about that back brace. What we really witnessed was a turning point, the kind of game that quietly tells you a team is becoming something serious, even if the headlines are focused somewhere else. Because let's be honest, if this was last season, a night like this probably ends very differently for the Indiana Fever. If Caitlin Clark struggled to shoot, the offense likely would have stalled. The pressure would have built. The game might have slipped away. But that didn't happen. Not even close. Instead, they adjusted. They leaned on each other. They found different ways to score, different ways to control the pace, different ways to win. That's growth. That's maturity. And more importantly, that's what real contenders do. And that's why this game matters more than people think. Not because of the final score, but because of how they got there. Because it showed that this team is no longer fragile. It showed that they don't need everything to go perfectly to succeed. And in a league where every team is talented, where every matchup is competitive, that ability to win without perfection is everything. At the same time, you can't ignore the reality that this entire situation still revolves around Clark. That's just the truth. She's the engine. She's the gravity. She's the player that changes how defenses operate before the ball is even in her hands. And if she's healthy, if she finds her rhythm again, everything we saw in this game becomes even more dangerous. The spacing improves. The decision-making becomes sharper. The scoring becomes more efficient. The entire system levels up. But if there's one thing this game proved, it's that the Fever are no longer just waiting for Clark to carry them. They are building something alongside her. Something that supports her, complements her, and keeps the team competitive no matter what kind of night she's having. And that balance, that combination of star power and depth, is exactly what separates teams that are exciting from teams that are actually built to win. So now we are at a very interesting point. The excitement is real. The concern is real. The potential is undeniable. And the uncertainty, that's still there too. Because until we get clear answers about her condition, until we see her back on the court again, there's always going to be that question lingering in the background. But maybe that's what makes this moment so important. Because it's not just about proving how good they are when everything is going right. It's about proving who they are when things aren't perfect. And right now, the Indiana Fever look like a team that's ready to take that next step. A team that doesn't break under pressure. A team that adapts. A team that keeps moving forward, no matter what the situation looks like. And if that continues, if the growth we just saw is real, if the chemistry keeps building, if Caitlin Clark is healthy and locked in. Then this isn't just a storyline. This is a warning. A warning that the Fever aren't coming slowly anymore. They are coming fast. And the rest of the league might not be ready for what's about to happen next. At the end of all this noise, all the reactions, all the debates, everything really comes down to one simple truth, and it's not as complicated as people are making it. What we saw in this game wasn't a problem, it was a glimpse. A glimpse of what this Indiana Fever team is becoming, and why the rest of the league should start paying very close attention. Because even with the uncertainty surrounding Caitlin Clark, even with the missed shots, even with that moment on the bench that had everyone worried, they still looked like a team in control. And that's the part that matters most. Because great teams aren't defined by perfect nights, they are defined by how they handle imperfect ones. And this was far from perfect. The rhythm wasn't there the entire game. The star player wasn't at her best statistically. The conversation shifted mid-game from excitement to concern. And yet, none of that derailed them. They stayed composed. They stayed aggressive. They trusted the system. And they walked out with a convincing win against a high-level opponent. That's not normal for a young team. That's not something you can fake. That's something you build. And what makes it even more important is the timing. This is early. This is still the stage where teams are figuring things out, where rotations aren't set, where chemistry is still developing. And yet, despite all of that, this team already looks like it understands how it wants to play. Fast. Confident. Unselfish. That identity is starting to show, and once that gets locked in, it becomes very difficult to stop. Now bring it back to Clark for a second, because no matter how much we talk about the team, she's still the center of everything. And maybe that's why this moment is actually more important than it looks. Because this wasn't a game where she had to prove she can score, we already know that. This was a game where she showed she can still impact winning even when the shot isn't falling. And at the highest level of basketball, that's what separates stars from superstars. But the question still lingers, and it's not going anywhere until we get a clear answer: what's going on with her physically? Because that's the only thing that can truly slow this team down. Not the offense. Not the defense. Not the competition. Health is the only variable that can change the entire trajectory of this season. And until that's fully clear, there's always going to be a level of tension around everything they do. At the same time, if that concern fades, if the updates come back clean, if she steps on the court next game looking the same or even better, then everything flips again. The narrative shifts from concern to fear. Not fear for the Fever, but fear of them. Because a team that can win like this without their star at full strength becomes something entirely different when that star is fully locked in. And that's the moment we are approaching right now. The moment where this team either confirms what we are starting to believe, or resets the conversation completely. But one thing is already clear, whether people want to admit it or not. This isn't just hype anymore. This isn't just potential. This is a team that's starting to look real. And if Caitlin Clark is healthy, then what we are watching right now isn't just a good start. It's the beginning of something that could take over the entire league.